Ascendai, The Destiny Crest. Audiobook by Robinson and Walsh. Chapter 11. Sandy. Sandy was filled with a mixture of joy and grief as she stared at her brother. "Colt, did our parents make it?" she asked, not knowing if she really wanted an answer. The look that he gave her said it all. She broke down and cried as he told her about their deaths. As she tried to process the news, she managed to say, "Candy didn't make it either." Accio came up to her and put his hand on her shoulder. "I'm sorry for your loss, Jade." "I mean Sandy," he said with concern clear in his voice. "Jade?" Colt asked as he wiped his own eyes, fighting back tears. "That was the name I gave her," Accio answered with a small smile, "because of her beautiful green eyes." He looked at the grieving girl and then back at her brother. "I think the two of you need a little time alone." Colt nodded. "I'm sorry for both of your losses." Sandy heard Accio talking to Colt, but it was through a fog. It seemed like everything had just happened. The avalanche, her parents' and Candy's death, it hit her all at once. Her heart felt like it was breaking in two. "Sandy," Accio said quietly, "when you are finished talking, please bring Colt back to camp with you. I have something important I need to discuss with him." Sandy bowed her head and swiped at her cheeks with her hands, trying to get herself under control. "Yes, master," she managed to get out before the sobs once again overtook her. After a small bow towards Colt, Accio left silently, and the rest of his students followed. As they passed Sandy, they each placed a hand lightly on her shoulder, silently lending support, before they followed Accio out the door. When they were alone, Colt led her over to the couch and sat down next to her. He started talking, telling her how he had survived the avalanche and about all the challenges he had faced over the last year and a half. Sandy began regaining her composure as she listened to how he had survived on the streets after running away from the orphanage. A smile crossed her face as he described Maurice and how the old man had helped to save him. She didn't quite know what to think when he started talking about his connection with the wolf Samson, who was lying on the floor at his feet. "It seems like something you'd see at the movies," she thought in disbelief. "Of course, I just spent the last year being trained by a master assassin in how to kill vampires. It's not any stranger than that. I guess anything seems possible now." "You've changed," she told her brother when he finished his story. He looked puzzled. "How so?" "You look older, stronger." She remembered her brother as a tall boy. Now, even though only a little over a year had passed, he looked more like a young man. He was taller than before, and even though he was still lean, she could see the cuts of hard muscle in his arms. A fire was burning in the cabin, but Candy could still feel a slight chill through her heavy coat. Colt was sitting next to her in a short-sleeved shirt, feeling comfortable. She knew that he had never been a follower, but now he seemed to have a self-assurance about him that Sandy guessed must have come from having to handle all the things that he had gone through. His eyes and hair was the same. His hair was still the white blonde she remembered. His unique blue eyes still looked pure and innocent to her. His spirit seemed untouched by all his hardships. "You've changed too," he said quietly. "You know," Colt paused and said, "I really miss Mom and Dad, but at least we found each other. That's more than some people have." "Yeah, I know. It's just hard." "Sandy," he said in a low voice, "do you remember what happened to you and Candy the day of the avalanche?" "Yes," she said, feeling her stomach twist at the memory. She took a deep breath, trying to calm herself as she looked into her brother's eyes. "I remember." "Can you tell me?" he asked. "Yes." She took a moment to gather her thoughts. "I'll try." "Take your time," he said, knowing that it would be hard on her. She stared into the fire, her hands clenched tightly in her lap, as she thought back to the day her whole life had fallen apart. "I remember watching Dad being swept away by the snow." Colt felt a chill run through his body as he recalled the moment. "Then we were thrown off of our snowmobile. Mom just disappeared. I couldn't see what happened to her, but I managed to hold on to Candy. I don't know exactly what happened next. There was so much snow I couldn't see anything. All I could think about was not letting go of Candy." Colt nodded. He knew just how she had felt. Helpless. "I remember being very cold. We were being tossed around and it hurt a lot. At one point I must have lost consciousness because when I woke up it was all over. I was covered in snow. It wasn't much, I just pushed it off. I felt like I had been hit by a truck and I was so cold. I was lying on a shelf right on the edge of a massive cliff. I would have gone over if it wasn't for a huge boulder that was sitting on the shelf." Sandy felt tears begin to spill down her cheeks as she thought back. Colt moved closer and put an arm around her shoulders to comfort her. She could feel heat radiating from Colt. It made her feel a little bit more comfortable. "I'm okay," she told him. "The boulder, the one that kept me from going over, it killed Candy." Huge sobs racked her body, and she could barely breathe. There was so much blood, it was everywhere. "So much blood," she gasped out and covered her eyes as though to block out the sight. "It's okay, Sandy, calm down. You don't have to do this," Colt whispered as he held her tight. No, I'm fine," she said as she slowed her breathing and tried to gather her poise. "I'm sorry," she said, wiping her streaming eyes. "It just hurts. I can still see her just lying there, covered in blood, and there I was, basically unhurt. It just seems so unfair," she sighed. "She must have slammed into the boulder, and either her body or the snow stopped me from doing the same thing," she said, as she wiped more tears from her face. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Sandy," Colt said with compassion and wiped his own eyes as he remembered his other sister. "It gets worse, Colt," she said, her voice filled with pain. He looked at her, puzzled. What could be worse? "I left her there," she said as she broke down crying again. "I just left her there." "There was nothing else you could do," Colt said, trying to reassure you. "But I lost it, Colt. I don't know what happened," she cried, so full of shame she didn't know she could get beyond it. "I just lost it." "Is that when you lost your memory?" Colt asked, grabbing her hands. He wanted to give her as much support as he could. He guessed the shock of seeing Candy was more than her mind could handle. "Yes, I remember climbing back up from the shelf and just wandering through the forest. I had forgotten who I was, where I was, and even why I was there. I just lost it," she said as she covered her face with her hands, frustrated with her mental breakdown. I wonder how Accio found her, Colt thought. Then he recalled the earring. He reached into his pocket and pulled it out. Sandy looked up in surprise as he handed it to her. "Where did you find this?" she asked in amazement. Colt grinned at her. "On the roof of the cabin," he said, chuckling. "You have got to tell me how your earring ended up on the roof." "Well, I told you how I was wandering through the forest." "Yeah? Well, I fell through the roof." "What?" Colt looked at her like she was crazy. "What do you mean?" The sight of her brother's confusion made Sandy smile. "The avalanche buried the cabin." "Oh," Colt smiled at her as he understood. "The back of the cabin was pretty much trashed. It left a big hole in the back room. You know, you've seen it." "Yeah," he said, nodding. "It made that part of the roof really weak, so when I stepped on the snow—" "You fell through the roof," Colt finished her sentence. "Right, but I couldn't see the roof. All I saw was snow. I thought I was on the ground. Well, until I fell through." They both laughed. The mood in the small cabin slowly began to lighten. "You know," Sandy continued, "at the time it felt like really bad luck, but landing inside a cabin full of food probably saved my life." "Yeah, thanks for saving me some," Colt said sarcastically, remembering the empty cupboards. Sandy grinned over at him and then looked around the small space. "I was trapped inside this place for a long time. I don't know exactly how long, but it seemed like forever." "I bet it did," Colt said. "How did you get out?" "Master Accio. He saved me." "Really? Good thing he came along, huh?" Sandy nodded. "How did he know you were in here?" "That's the crazy part. He was on the trail of 3 vampires that were traveling together. He'd known for a while that they were in the area, but he couldn't risk taking them on while they were together." "Why not?" Colt asked, confused. "They're too powerful. It's hard enough for a human to face one and survive, much less 3, Sandy exclaimed. "It's just not done." "Yeah, I bet," Colt said, thinking back on the speed and power of the creature he'd faced the night before. "Well, to be honest," Sandy said, "it was actually the vampires who found me." "That's not good." "No, it's not. Master Accio told me that their senses are beyond compare, and that they prefer drinking the blood of young women and children." "Why?" Colt asked in disgust. "Supposedly pure souls, which I guess means pure blood." "Weird." "Yeah, a little. That's just what I was told. I really don't know. But anyway, the vampires came across the cabin and knew I was inside." "But how did they know?" "I don't know for sure. I guess they probably smelled me. I guess I was like a frozen dinner," she snickered. "I was trapped. It probably seemed too easy for them to pass up." "Whoa, they must have some pretty powerful sniffers, or you just really stunk," Colt said, grinning at his sister. "Hey," she squealed and then smiled as she shoved him. "Anyway, the vampires began digging their way to the cabin door. I heard it and thought I was being rescued. I ran to the door and got there just as it was flung open towards me. It hit my head pretty hard and knocked me out cold. When I woke up, I was with Master Accio back at his camp. It wasn't until later that I found out that one of the vampires had kicked the door open just as I reached for the handle. Wow, cool. Did you live? Colt said jokingly. Nope, I didn't make it, she teased back. The clan broke one of their primary rules to save me, she said more seriously. What rule? Never face more than one vampire at a time. Duh. She grinned at him and lightly hit him on the arm. Oh yeah, sorry. I'm just teasing you. Really, when everything goes right, the vampires should never even know we are coming. We never face them in a head-to-head battle. That's part of our training. We don't stand a chance in a straight-up fight. The master says only stealthy executions. Anyway, where was I? I think a fight is coming, Colt said excitedly. Oh, right. Well, Master Accio took out 2 of the vampires with one stroke of his sword. At least that's what Justin told me. Crimson was supposed to get the other one. It was his first time facing vampires. He wasn't even supposed to be doing it yet, but under the circumstances, Master had no choice other than to let him help. What happened? Colt asked. Did you notice the scar on Crimson's face? Yes. The vampire lashed out at him with his hand and sliced Crimson's face just as he came at him with his sword. Justin moved at the vampire to help, and the vampire tossed him aside easily. How did they end up killing him? Crimson recovered quickly. He is very strong. When the vampire struck out at Justin, it gave Crimson the time he needed to move into position and kill him. I thought Crimson looked pretty tough. Yes, he is, Sandy nodded. So I've been training with Master Accio ever since. Wow, that's an insane story, Colt said in amazement. Yeah, for sure, she agreed. Well, I'm just glad you're okay, Colt told her. Thanks, she said as she smiled at him. I'm glad you're okay too. Colt stood and stretched his muscles. He had gotten stiff from sitting for so long. Sandy stood up and walked to the door to look outside. Wow, it's about to get dark. We've been talking all day. She turned to look at him. Come on, we'd better head back to camp. Okay, I guess I need to see what Master Accio wants to talk to me about. Sandy smiled at him. I know what he wants. Really? What? He wants you to join our clan. Colt looked at her in shock. He says you're special, she chuckled. Sandy, I don't know if I should do that. Why not? Sandy asked, sounding surprised. What else do we have? Everyone's gone. I don't know. I'm not saying no. I just need to think about it. Colt was unsure of what he needed to do. He felt that somehow he was being led towards some type of divine destiny, but he didn't know if joining Accio was supposed to be the next step of his journey. I do know one thing for sure. I'm not going to leave Sandy. She is all the family I've left. I do know one thing for sure. I'm not going to leave Sandy. She is all the family I've left. I guess I'm going to have to hear what he has to say before I make up my mind. That sounds fair. But Colt, we don't have really a lot of other positive options. Yeah, I know. I definitely don't want to go back to an orphanage, or foster care either, she said with a serious tone. Yeah, me neither. But whatever we do, we need to stick together, he said, hoping she'd agree. Definitely, she said as she hugged him reassuringly. All right, great. We can talk about it some more on our way back. Okay, sounds good, she agreed. Let's get going, he said, grabbing his pack. He was unsure of what their next move was going to be, but he felt happy knowing that whatever they did decide, he'd have Sandy and Samson with him.